like to start off this evening by thanking all of you here present with us, and especially our guests who are being with us by Zoom tonight. I'd like to just share a couple comments. The meeting tonight is hosted by the Friends of Ravenna Schools, with representatives present on stage with us to share pertinent information for all of us. I'd like to just share part of Ohio law that it states that it is forbidden for Ohio school administrators to promote a levy. So our district administrators will be here to answer information on factual information. And once again, I'd like to just share and welcome all of you. What I'd like to do is just say, as you enter this campus today, I'd like to envision what you saw. You came in past a 16-year-old building. As you were parking your car, you looked to the west and you saw a stadium that's 27 years old. That's part of our campus. But this evening, I'd like you to join with me on a journey. I'd like you to think of a special day in the future when we're traveling on Chestnut Street approaching the high school site. There'll be a lot of traffic. We're approaching the high school building. We see a lot of red, white, and blue banners everywhere. We see children lined up on the driveway in a safe manner. The Ravenna band is playing, welcoming people. Balloons are flying everywhere. The cheerleaders and athletes are present. As we enter the site to the west of the building, we see something different. We see reconfigured bus lanes for all levels of children entering the building. We see 3 new wings of our building to the west. We see 3 new playgrounds for our children. We see so many kids and parents dressed in Raven blue colors. We're here for ribbon cutting in the future for our new building. I'd like you to envision, after the ribbon has been cut, we see children and staff running inside the new building for our children to see their new building. Yes, Ravenna community, you made it happen. That's what we're envisioning for our children. So I'm happy to also welcome and introduce our levy co-chair, Connie Bennett. And a special honor for us, just yesterday, last evening, she was introduced through the Ravenna Chamber as a Lifetime Achievement Award. So we're privileged to have Connie with us as co-chair, but a special honor was bestowed upon her last night.
Thank you, Bill. You're too kind. That was very sweet. Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for all. Thanks to all of you for attending tonight and our community meeting. My name is Connie Bennett, as Bill mentioned, and I'm the co-chair of Friends for Ravenna Schools Committee, along with Bill. And it's really been a pleasure to work with Bill over this time frame. But it is my distinct privilege tonight to introduce our panelists that will be presenting this evening. First, you guys might want to just give a little wave. First is our superintendent, Mr. Ben Reiblin, our treasurer, Ms. Kristen Plageman, our director of business operations, Mr. Jeremy McDevitt. And I'd also like to take this opportunity and ask our Ravenna School District board members in the audience tonight to please stand and be recognized. Thank you all so much. Our next 4 panelists represent our architecture project team from Fanning Howey and Olsovsky Jaminet. They're to my immediate right here. First is Jennifer Fuller, project executive and principal in charge. Jen is a project executive and principal with the firm demonstrating the leadership skills to help everyone perform at their highest level. As an architect, Jen is focused on master planning, engagement, and design through the entire project to make sure those early decisions become a reality. She is a powerful advocate for the owner's vision and goals. Next is Dan Obrenba, project executive. Dan knows how to develop school districts' chart a course for success. As an architect, he is a skilled author of master plans that address physical conditions, enrollment trends, and the community's vision for education in responsive and meaningful ways. Dan has helped numerous Ohio school districts move through visioning, engagement, and planning to arrive at a successful facility option. Third is Jeff Palmer, client liaison. Jeff brings extensive educational leadership experience as a former superintendent, including 18 years leading school districts ranging from rural communities to large suburban systems. His experience includes capital projects spanning small renovations to full K-12 new construction. Jeff understands that a school district's primary mission is educating students while maintaining day-to-day operations, and he helps clients successfully balance those responsibilities throughout the planning, design, and construction phase. Serving as both advisor and sounding board, Jeff provides practical insight from the owner's perspective to help districts navigate complex building projects with confidence. And the fourth team member is an architect with Olsovsky Jaminet, Jonathan Imler. John brings comprehensive knowledge and a strong work ethic to the Fanning Howey team, having collaborated on various projects over a span of 20 years. As an architect, John participates early in the design process to ensure the client's vision is reflected in detailed construction documents and carried out through construction. Our last panelist is to my far right, is Ryan Callender, Financial Counsel with Squire Patton Boggs. Ryan's experience includes serving as bond disclosure and underwriters counsel in a variety of conventional and capital market public debt financings. Ryan is experienced in general obligation debt, revenue bond debt, tax increment financing, and certificates of participation. Before we get started this evening, I would also like to share that information presented tonight has been compiled in response to community interest and questions that we've received. At this time, I would like to welcome our treasurer, Ms. Kristen Plageman, to begin tonight's presentation.
Thank you for all that are here in attendance and for those that are viewing it online. So I'm going to begin the first slide, which is how did we get here? Is it working? All right, here we go. So what was our financial outlook? Let's go back in history to May of 2024. The district was placed in fiscal oversight by the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce. This means that we had two things occurring. We had deficit spending, our expenses were higher than our revenue, and we had negative cash funds. So the district was placed in fiscal oversight, so we basically had 1 year to remove ourselves from fiscal oversight, or we would have been placed in a higher level fiscal oversight, which would require us to have been overseen by a commissioner and having to take loans in order to certify our bills and pay our wages. When a district is in fiscal oversight, they not only are under the guidance of Ohio Department of Education and Workforce, but also the state of the Ohio auditors would conduct a whole performance audit. So a performance audit was conducted, and in collaboration with district administrators, ODEW, and the state auditors, we engaged in a three-prong attack. So it was staffing reductions in order to align with our decreased enrollment. It is a multi-year building consolidation plan, and the passage of the operating levy for Ravenna School District. And on behalf of the district and the Board of Education, we'd like to again thank our community for their passage of our emergency levy. So where are we now? So right now we are actually very proud. We were removed from fiscal oversight in 1 year, which is per Ohio Department of Education and Workforce, we were the only district that actually was able to remove ourselves from fiscal oversight in less than a year. We have no deficit spending, and we have a positive fund balance. So, and this is based upon our maintaining our continuous funding that we do receive at this time.
So Mrs. Plageman did talk about our three-pronged plan to increase our revenue and decrease deficits. She did mention that there was a performance audit conducted by the Ohio Auditor's Office that made recommendations, and we set out to stick to that very strictly. We started with staff reductions to align with decreased enrollment, and that included not bringing positions back when people retire through attrition. We did have several reduction in forces that we did as our enrollment dropped to make sure that we got in a good position that we can afford. Then we started with the consolidation plan. Last year, we closed West Park, which was an all-kindergarten building, and sold that building. And this year is the last year for West Main Elementary as well. Next year, we're going to be looking at 3 buildings. When I began in the district, we had 10 properties, so we're trying to reduce that to a place where we can afford it and maintain it well. Next year, Williard will be kindergarten through 2nd grade again. Our middle school currently, which houses 5 through 8, is going to become a 3 through 6 building, and then our high school is going to take on our 7th and 8th graders along with the 9 through 12 next year. And then, of course, the passage of our operating levy, which was an emergency levy last year. We can't thank the voters enough to help us keep moving forward in our finances that is set up where we are now. And I want to point out that this was set in place before we had anything to do with the new building project. We had to do this to get back on track and to stay stable before any of this came to us.
So I'm going to touch on what exactly is the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission. You're going to hear OFCC a lot. Without the OFCC, we would not be sitting here in the position that we are currently as a school district with the possibility of building a new building. The Ohio Facilities Construction Commission oversees and provides financial assistance to school districts in order to build new facilities. The amount of money that the OFCC provides to a district can vary. They actually use a 3-year average and rank all the districts in the state. They look at property values when they do that, and Ravenna is currently sitting in a position where the OFCC is providing 76% of the funding for a new build. This isn't a loan. This isn't something that the district in the future has to pay back. Their commission is to build quality schools around the state of Ohio and help districts who have determined a need because of the age of their facilities. And Ravenna just happens to be in a good position right now with a 76% state share. So, looking at some of the things that the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission does when they are working with a district, they look at your student enrollment. They're a very numbers-based organization. If you want a lot of additional perks in your school, those are things that you would have to fund locally. They're looking at square footage and building quality schools where we can educate our children. They look at your enrollment. As most of you probably know, Ravenna Schools has had a declining enrollment. And so they look at what kind of footprint you currently have, what kind of footprint it would take to house and educate all your children. So they're looking at student enrollment. They look at what your current building capacity is. And when they do that, they look at buildings that meet their standards. So when you look at a district like ours, this building that we're sitting in currently meets OFCC standards, but many of our other, actually all of our other buildings do not, just because of the age of those buildings. So when they're looking at building capacity, they look at a building like this and say, how many students can that hold? That then determines our need, which is how many students are left outside of this building do we need to educate. And so the OFCC will then present districts with various plans. We ended up, I believe, with 4 or 5 different plans going back and forth with OFCC. But they will continue to be a partner. If this project is to move ahead, the OFCC will be a building partner throughout the length of this project. So it's not like once the money's handed over, you stop hearing about the OFCC. They have guidelines that will have to be met as we do a build, but they work alongside whoever the architectural firm is, the school administrators, the community, and see this project through to the end.
All right, So let's talk about a timeline of events here. I do want to point out, and Jeremy was talking about, the 76 portion of it being provided from the state. When we built this building in 2010, we received 53%. So the percentage has greatly increased as we have gotten along further in time. So the timeline of events here, the exploratory phase, we found out in late November, early December of '24. We had contact from OFCC to discuss whether we would like to be put into the queue and begin exploring whether or not we would be possible to build here. So we entered into an expedited local partnership slated for future funding, which was 2 years out, and we entered into the CFAP, which is the Classroom Facility Assistance Program, because other districts on the list could not obtain the funding. So you'll hear later, as we talk about, you have a certain amount of time once they approve you for the money to secure your part of the funding, and other school districts that were on the list ahead of us were unable to, so we jumped up on that list. Between January and July of '25, we had conversations with Mr. Callender from Squire, Patton and Boggs, and other financial institutions, whether this would be possible. And the OFCC began building assessments and student enrollment studies from Ravenna School District. We have had these in the past when we built this building, and they took those and showed the changes that we've had over the years and their projections on enrollment, which, looking back, were very accurate back when we built this building in 2010. In September, they provided us master planning options with the 76-24% payment split, and we continued to vet those options, which is still ongoing at that time. OFCC then presented to our Board of Education in January of '26 to provide those options, and we can start looking at what our options were. And then in February, we selected Fanning and Howie as our pre-funded architect along the way. So anything leading up to the project, Fanning and Howie is in partnership with us on that. So at that point in time, OFCC determined that we were an ideal candidate for a new consolidated elementary building due to our decreased current enrollment and the projected enrollment moving forward. And they based that off of birth rates and where we're at currently and the size of our classes. They did take a look at all of our buildings and begin to put it through their process where they determine whether or not it's worth a renovation or that we need to build it. And they determined that our outdated facilities, they look at the structural and the functionality, and most of our buildings were built in the 50s and 60s. Not that we have not maintained them throughout the years, but that to renovate those is going to be a larger cost than to build. And they determined that the high maintenance cost due to the age of the existing buildings was going to be too high. So as a result, they put us into the 76% coverage of a new building project, and that's where we're at this point.
We'll kind of cover a few things you've already heard, but maybe in a different way. OFCC, as you've heard, will be coming up quite often as a co-owner and partner if you move forward with a project. They've been established since 1997, served over 400 districts in the state. So this is definitely an equity plan to really support school districts that need a help getting older facilities renovated or new built. And as you've heard, it's also based on some of that capacity and just enrollment projections over time. Some of their guidelines are a 350 rule. So the student count in a building has to be 350 students or more. We fall within that category in your district. There is also a 2/3 rule. So you'll hear a lot of comparisons to a renovate versus a new cost, and that's where the 2/3 rule come in. You've seen that already. We've been talking, we'll talk about that a little more. And really what that boils down to is the difficulty to renovate an older facility. I'm sure you've seen this in a home. imagine it in a bigger commercial facility or institutional facility like the school. And it's just, over time, it's just more and more difficult to renovate that, bring that up to code compliance for ADA compliance. And so they do put a cost and percentage to that, the state does as their assessment. And there's also more operational efficiencies with a newer build. The systems that are designed today just really give the district the benefit long-term of operational costs, which I know you heard early in the presentation. That's been a focus of the school district. So even without a new build, the goal here is just efficiencies across the district, and that's updating buildings where they can be and possibly building new. So that's where this partnership with OFCC will really go a long way. The other thing is the funding timeline, so we'll talk about that a little bit. And then they're a co-owner through the life of the construction project. They give you the money, you're not paying it back, and then they're there along the way just to make sure that you need any support, they're there to give it to you, right? School districts are not always in the business of building, so that's where you, architects, we come in, and then OFCC really supports the process too. Just a quick comment about the graphics that are on the screen. This will just show you over time. It goes back to 2011, where there were different local shares. So as you heard, when this building was built, I think it was at 50%, 53. So over time, it has started to, I guess, opposite, go up. So there's been more increase on the state share and less on your share, which is great. But there's been a change. If you look at the 21 to 25, it got to 23% local, and now it's going back up to 24. So this is a great time for the district to to capitalize on what the state can provide at that 76%. If you look at the graph, you can start to see at the end that that's going up by a percentage, and who knows what that'll look like in another 2 to 5 years. It could continue to rise. So the 76% is a great time to lock in with the state, which is what the district is doing, and get the full amount of funds on that shared property. And again, some of the things that we're going to keep hitting home is the OFCC, that 2/3 rule, so kind of a 67% repair to renovate cost. There's also the consolidations that you're already doing, but it's the age of the facilities. They're getting beyond the threshold that the state would recognize that is a benefit to renovate, that new makes a lot more sense. Again, efficiencies just of newer design systems today. And that the benefit of the 76% provided by the state, this is the best time to capitalize on a new build. And we'll talk about some of the options, but really, again, just reinforcing this is just a wonderful time to partner with a state agency.
I'll pick up here kind of where Mr. Ribelin left off. Once Fanning and Howie was secured as our partner in February, we did not have a lot of time. We had until April to select a plan with the OFCC. We do have to meet OFCC deadlines to keep this process moving forward, so that did not give us a lot of time. And again, as a district, that's why we reached out and hired Fanning Howie to assist with this. With them being in the business of building schools and knowing site plans, they're the experts that we were relying on to help us vet through the 5 different programs that OFCC had given us and our Board of Education to look through. So in March, we started vetting those plans, looking at the costs, and quite simply, we were looking for something that would meet the needs of the students in this community and also not require more funding from our taxpayers. And so that's what we were looking for, and Fanning and Howie worked with us. We were meeting every week or every couple weeks, going through plans, and in April, they presented all of our work to the Board of Education and had narrowed those 5 down to 1, which we consider the best plan to move forward with. And at that point, we did issue a letter to the OFCC stating our intention of building a K-6 addition onto this building.
Jeremy mentioned he mentioned the 5 master plans, and when we received that information, understand the state OFCC had done all the heavy lift on enrollment projections, building conditions, and this sort of thing, and then they processed these 5 master plans. Each master plan is a multi-page document. We kind of gleaned out the key elements, and you'll see it on the right-hand side of this worksheet. Things such as how many students, how many square feet, what the local cost was, what the state cost contribution was, and these sorts of things. And then there were LFIs, locally funded initiatives, depending on the solution. And then we also developed a pro-con list that you can see off to the right, that things that were important to the district, and one of those being keeping the cost down to a minimum while serving the most amount of kids, all of the kids. And so if you go to the next slide, we further then refined it down to basically this. This is the easiest way of looking at it. And if you look at the bottom 3, each one of those have heavy locally funded initiatives. I didn't catch it until right as this meeting was starting, but there's an error on the last one. Doesn't matter. Each one of them was in excess of their goal of 0 LFIs. So when you look at the option, the first and second option, those were 0 LFIs, okay, keeping the cost down to a minimum for the district. But the second option was giving the district the most amount of square footage. So it really became clear. It took a while to process all that out, and we worked through it with the board, and then the board just basically arrived at that conclusion.
So we had 2 sites considered for the new elementary school. On the left is the Willard site, and on the right is the high school campus. At a quick glance, there's quite a bit of available land directly behind Willard School, whereas the high school campus is also shared with many athletic facilities, fields, and so forth. If we can go to the next slide to focus on Willard. So the preference was to have a single-story elementary school. We were not able to fit a 1-story solution on the Willard site. What you're looking at in orange right here is actually a 2-story solution, and as you can see, it fills up almost all of the available land. The difficulty with this is while you're occupying an elementary school, the existing elementary school, construction workers, staging areas have to be put in place, and the only way in and out of the property is past the elementary school. So to have a safe site with students occupying while you're having heavy equipment moving by, construction workers, and also the limited areas to stage structural materials, asphalt, concrete, things of that nature, this site really has proven to be difficult to really work out. So if we can go to the high school site, and again, it seems a little counterintuitive with everything that's going on. Many of the site constraints are, there's a gas well, there's existing stormwater retention areas, all of your fields that are in the way. So the approach is to minimize the amount of disruption while school is in session for the existing high school students. But as you can see, one of the solutions was adding on to the west, which would take up the west parking lot. The parking would be relocated in the practice fields, and the practice fields would then be relocated to the south. So many of the athletic functions could remain as is. Now, this is a single-story solution. Though it is attached to the high school, it is an independent elementary school. The ability for staff to pass between one side and the other, obviously you can have control security doors with key fobs. And if we go to the next slide, just to zoom in a little bit closer, there's great importance on isolating all of your site traffic. so that the high school drop-off operates here. The bus drop-off for the elementary school is completely independent from the high school buses, and then the elementary school parent drop-off would be at the rear. Now again, this is a conceptual plan. This building has not been designed. This is just showing the concept that this could happen. With safety on-site and safety within the building, again, it's a completely independent school, so they would have their own dining facilities, their own gymnasiums, their own separate entry points. So the high school site offers the least amount of disruption, helps us maintain separation on-site and in the building, and give you the one-story solution.
Okay. So they got to talk about the fun stuff of the new building, but we also have to talk a little bit about the funding of the 24% share that the school district would be expected to raise. The Ohio law is very restrictive on local governments, including school districts, on the ability to raise money through debt. There are very few choices on purpose for local governments to do that. One would certainly be cash, but when you're dealing with a larger capital improvement project like this, very few school districts would have that amount of cash available. Another, jumping down a little bit, is the PI levy, that stands for Permanent Improvement Levy. When a PI levy is approved by the voters, which you have in the past, the monies that come in from that levy must be used on assets that have at least a 5-year life. So certainly what we're talking about here works in that case. And those often generate funds for smaller projects or generate funds that could be used to pay debt service on a larger project that you would need to leverage in order to pay for it up front. A third option is a bond, which you see in the second slide. For school districts in Ohio, Ohio law is very restrictive on the ability to issue a bond. And really think of a bond as just a loan or debt. It's just how the Ohio Revised Code defines how a school district can issue its debt, or one of the ways. A bond would require, of this size, would require a levy vote to go to the residents of the school district in order to approve that bond. A fourth option here is the loan or lease. That would be where there's not necessarily a specific new piece of revenue coming in, or you identify that separately in order to pay the debt service, but you're able to do what's somewhat convoluted, but it's directly in the Ohio Revised Code that allows you to lease back the particular facility. And in this particular case, that's certainly what we have thought is the most efficient route for the school district to pursue, along with proceeds from your PI levy in order to pay the debt service on that lease. And then, of course, finally, we've heard a lot about the OFCC funds. In this particular case, again, 76% of the cost of the facility would actually be coming directly from the state. When we talk about that a little bit, I think the superintendent mentioned early on that when you first started discussions with the state, you actually were looking to enter into what's really a preliminary program called the an expedited program, ELP. Going into that, your funds are a little bit on the if-come when you're in that preliminary program. The state says they're going to give it to you, but it's not yet appropriated by the state. A very, very tiny risk, but there's a risk that the state never comes up with those funds. Fortuitously, you almost immediately went from preliminary into the actual program, and that's the OFCC program. Once an agreement is signed and everything is approved by the OFCC, which should occur in the next few months, that money is actually appropriated at the state level. And once it's appropriated at the state level, then it's as close to a guarantee as you can get that the district will receive that money. Excuse me, once you have the funds available on your side, so in other words, once we issue if the PI levy is approved, which we'll talk about as a renewal, and you issue the new lease or loan, once those funds are available, you'll actually enter into a project agreement with the state in which those appropriated funds will then be contractually yours at that point. The OFCC, essentially what happens here is the OFCC or the state keeps a list of all school districts around the state. Those that have already gone through fully and rebuilt their campuses, and those who have not, or those who have done partial, like Ravenna. And the list is is in order, and you were lucky enough, again, to be right in the right position to get into the full program immediately. But they don't want to hold on to that money for a long time because they want to go to the next school district if for some reason it doesn't work out with the identified school district. So essentially you have 16 months once it's approved, fully approved by the OSCC, which is expected this summer, to utilize and actually sign that project agreement. So when we're talking about renewing the PI levy, the permanent improvement levy, really there's 3 opportunities to do that, 2 Novembers and a May. If after 16 months the school district is not able to raise the funds, the 24%, then those funds will be de-appropriated by the state and they'll move on to the next school district on the list. So those funds will just go to another community. It's not that the funds will go away, they'll be assigned someplace else.
All right, so many people in the community ask, well, you sold 2 buildings. You sold West Park and you sold Tappan. What happened to those funds? So per Ohio Revised Code, the funds from the sale of a building can only be used for the maintenance of a new building or to go to the purchase price of a new building. So that money is in a separate account, an 070 fund that's been board approved, and that is there to, let's say if this project goes through at 48 million, our percentage would be 11.2 million. Those funds would reduce that amount from 11.2 to right now 9.2. So for every money that we can save, we're constantly putting it in the 070 to buy down the price of the loan that we would incur. So as Ryan mentioned, we do have a PI, a Permanent Improvement Levy Fund in place. It is a 5-year Permanent Improvement Levy Fund. It's very general in the way that it was voted on. It can be used for the maintenance of anything that has a shelf life of over 5 years. So it can be used for technology, it can be used for textbooks, it can be used for roofs, asphalt, it can be used for anything for buses, purchasing of buses or vans. And it also can be used to pay down the cost of a loan that we would secure from a bank. It is a 5-year PI. It does expire in January of 2029. So as Mr. Collender explained, we would have 3 attempts to renew this levy to be a continuous levy, but collecting the same amount of money that is currently being asked of from the taxpayers at this time. Now, I would like to say a disclaimer that everything that, if we proceeded with putting the levy on a ballot, this does need to be board approved with 2 resolutions from the Board of Education, and that is still we're not at that point at this moment.
So part of the OFCC requirement, as I think the good folks over here mentioned, they become a partner. They also want to make sure that any new building that they're a part of and that they provide funds for is taken care of in the long term. So one of the requirements is that any facilities project as a part of the agreement must have what is equivalent to a $500,000 put aside every year into a maintenance fund for 23 years to be used only for the maintenance of that particular facility. So there's always a fund available to the extent that there are any either intended or unintended improvements that are necessary for that particular facility for 23 years. Don't ask me why 23 years. I've been doing this for over 20 years. I've never gotten the answer why the General Assembly wanted 23 years, but that is the law. So part of the PI levy, if it's renewed and you enter into the agreement of with the OFCC, part of that PI levy will be portioned off to put that $500,000, what is the equivalent of a $500,000, into that maintenance fund each year for 23 years to take care of the building, which is about $250,000 annually. So again, if the district is unable to come up with the money in order to do the 24%, within the 16 months, the state will move to the next district. The plan right now is not to go out with a specific bond levy, but to do a separate loan. But obviously the school district wants, and I assume the citizens want to make sure that you have some sort of revenue available to pay that debt service. So your existing PI levy as a renewal would be that source. This is just an example of if the board chose to place the PI levy on the ballot, the renewal for a continuing period of time on the November ballot. It is a two-step process from the board's perspective. They would have to pass an initial resolution, which triggers a certification from the county auditor. Once they receive that certification, they can then move on to the second resolution, and everything has to be done by August 5th. On the right side is just an example of what the ballot language might look like. Ultimately, the ballot language has to be approved by the Secretary of State, so warning, this is probably what it'll look like, but Secretary of State gets the final say in what it looks like.
All right, so one thing that I did want to summarize is we currently are collecting $953,000 a year in this permanent improvement levy, and it's being used for the maintenance costs of our existing buildings and for other capital expenditures. If we do put this levy on pending board approval and it does get approved, how that would look would be $700,000 of that would go towards paying the loan and $250,000 would go towards that mandatory $500,000. But I wanted to stress the district uses all of that $950,000 right now for our existing buildings. So that money is still needed either for our existing buildings or to be based upon what the community and the board decides on a new building. So on the timeline, where are we at? So we're in June of 2026, and right now our next step would be, as we're waiting from OFCC, is called the NOCA, and it's the Notice of Conditional Approval, and that requires a board resolution. That is then sent to OFCC, and then at the July-August meeting that OFCC has, they are, it's called their approval meeting, and they are then confirming our master plan selection, our project cost, and at that time, the 16-month window for funding begins. So we would have then 3 opportunities, November of 26, May of 27, and November of 27, in order to pass a renewal levy for either the maintenance of our existing buildings and or a new building. So I do want to clarify, the money would stop coming in 28, January of 28. I inadvertently said 29, but it is in 28. So I apologize.
You said January 29, which was correct.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right, so what are our next steps? As we mentioned, we would, after the funding phase in July and August, we would be receiving the certification of conditional approval, or the COCA, and OFCC then hands out a program checklist that we need to do. In between that, though, we have a 120-day window that we would need to be board approved to, the board would vote on whether or not we're going to move forward with the project. Once they do that, we would get the program checklist. After funding is secured, hopefully, the program agreement stating funds are secured and our OFCC partnership begins. So they would be with us through the entire project, and then once that's completed, there's a sign-off that OFCC would not be part of it at the end, that we would be the ultimate owners of the building. We would also do a selection of the architect. Currently, we're working on pre-Gabon stuff with Fanning and Howie, but at that time, we would go through our recommendations and then assign a project manager to that project. Our project funding then would be coming in quarterly, and within 10 to 14 months after all that, the design process would begin. So that would involve the architect, the staff, the community. We would have input meetings where people can come and take a look at some renderings, as well as give any input that they might see be important for that building. And then after that, the build process would begin to completion. So at this point, you know, depending on when or how the funding is secured, we're looking at maybe 4 years out from today, or 4 years out from the school year from that project being completed if everything stays on track.
Once again, thank you to all the people present here, and thank you for everyone virtual, and a special thank you to all the panel members. I think you educated all of us. I think there will be more questions, but I thank you for the information shared this evening for all of our Ravenna community for what we have to look forward to eventually for our children's school. So I'd like to thank everyone for being here this evening, and I'd like to thank the Friends of Ravenna Schools who put forth this panel. So I'd like to thank the work that went in behind the scenes, and I'd like to ask Connie now to draw concluding remarks.
Thank you, Bill. Before we conclude tonight's meeting, the Friends of Ravenna School would love to invite you to our pancake breakfast on August 8th from 8:30 to 10:30 at the Ravenna High School. Our last breakfast that we held was very well received, very positive, and it's truly a great way to kick off the 2026-2027 school year. We would also welcome you to follow Friends of Ravenna Schools on social media, provide your contact information to stay up to date on committee news and opportunities to get involved to support our schools and our students. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.